All right, man, peace. So, brothers, many of you might remember that around the time of the NBA All-Star break, there was a situation that occurred with Steph Curry and James Harden, in which, supposedly, according to Steph Curry, James Harden divulged to him that the way in which he was playing over the course of the first half of the season was not due to how he wanted to play, but because of what was demanded of him due to the lack of other prominent players in the lineup at the time. From then, I knew that James Harden was full of shit. He was trying to hide the fact that he was a stat patter. He was aggressively trying to pursue his second consecutive regular season MVP award, and he felt embarrassed by that. He was embarrassed about it when Steph Curry came up and just tried to have a quote-unquote platonic regular conversation. You know, like how when someone feels guilty about something and you're just trying to find out how their day is going, and out of nowhere, they'll blurt out something that has nothing to do with your conversation. Like, hey, Reggie, how's your day going? Oh, man, I didn't cheat on my wife. What? Nobody asked you about you and your wife, brother. Man, just going on about some shit that has nothing to do with what you asked him. That's what I picked up from that whole Stephen Curry, James Harden situation. And I think Steph picked it up as well, because he tried to act as if he was not aware that the camera was filming him when he divulged that information to one of the All-Star game coaches. It's very clear to me that Steph Curry realized that there were some chinks in the Rockets' armor and that eventually it was going to come to a head, which it has. It did not come to a head during the season or even during the playoffs per se. But right after the Rockets were eliminated, supposedly James Harden and Chris Paul had a big blow up in the locker room in reference to how James Harden is choosing to play. I think that many of James Harden's teammates understand that even though Mike D'Antoni and Daryl Morey and the system that they try to promote is a problem, the main problem is James Harden, because they see that essentially Mike D'Antoni is scared of confronting James Harden. Maybe many of the other members of the Rockets squad have tried to speak to Mike D'Antoni about their style of play, and he's responded back by saying, I'm not allowed to correct James Harden. I'm not allowed to coach him, because Harden comes off as a player who is very pampered by Daryl Morey. At first, I thought that he was being pampered by Mike D'Antoni and Daryl Morey, but the more that I scrutinize the situation, the more that I'm forced to come to terms with the fact that James Harden is mostly the problem. There was even a game earlier this season in Golden State where the Rockets were able to win in overtime. James Harden hit a three-point shot over Draymond Green and Klay Thompson, and he started to yell at Draymond Green, and after the game was over, you could read his lips. He was saying, yes, I'm going to be the MVP again, or something along those lines. He was talking about being the MVP. So that showed me that that was what his concern was. It was not winning a championship. Everyone claims that they want to win, but when it comes down to the sacrifice that it takes to win, you quickly find out who's who and what's what. So anyway, they're going to talk about this issue between James Harden and Chris Paul, and I'm going to chime in.
As if things couldn't get worse for the Rockets after another series loss to the Warriors, tensions reportedly boiled over in the locker room after they were eliminated. According to The Athletic, James Harden and Chris Paul had multiple tense moments with one another throughout Game 6 that led to a war of words in the locker room. It's noted the argument centered around ball distribution and Houston's style of play. Let's go to Stephen A. Stephen A., I understand you have some information on that, and I'm going to ask you this question as well. How then do the Rockets fix their problems?
Well, the answer to that is easy. They're going to have to start from the ground floor. What I mean by that is that they're going to have to pursue a trade of James Harden and start all over from scratch. I don't believe that James Harden at this point in his career really can change. I don't think that he's willing to change. And I also believe that it's going to be exceedingly difficult to find another coaching system and another group of players who are going to be willing to acclimate themselves to James Harden's mentality out there on the floor. What he is a regular season dynamo, pretty much in the vein of a Dominique Wilkins or maybe even a Bernard King. But he's not someone who's ever going to win a championship. He does not play in that style, and he's unable to transcend adversity in moments of peril.
Three things I want to say. Number one, considering the first two segments of this show with the drivel that was coming out of Max Kellerman's mouth, I want America to know I love this man because he knows how exhausted and tired I am, and he did it on purpose to wake me up. So I thank my brother, Max Kellerman. Good looking out, bro. Good looking out. Number two, in all seriousness, yesterday before I did the 6 o'clock Sports Center, the story had come out in the Athletic guys about what had happened with CP3 and James Harden in the aftermath of Game 6. I had several players get me on a conference call who will remain nameless to emphatically deny that there was any truth to that whatsoever. They acknowledged that there was some friction between CP3 and James Harden, as it was with CP3 and others on the court during Game 6, but they said that's always CP3. He's a pit bull. He gets after it and gets after people that he doesn't feel are doing the things that they're supposed to do.
Well, here's the problem with Chris Paul at this point in his career. He's going to have to start to take inventory of who he is as a player, because he might think of himself as the Chris Paul of the New Orleans Hornets back in 2008, who arguably could have won an MVP award. He's not that guy anymore. In 2019, he's an aging and expiring point guard who you cannot depend on in crucial moments, and one can make the case that he's never been dependable in crucial moments. He's someone who suffers from anxiety issues. I can tell that just by looking at him. He becomes very tight in playoff games, especially in crucial moments. And for him to be someone who is so confrontational with other teammates, it's not like you're Isaiah Thomas, someone who raises your level at the moments when your teammates need you the most. You're not that guy. So for you to decide that you're going to be the one to go back and forth with James Harden, that tells me two things. Well, maybe more than two things. It tells me that this is something that he's been bottling up now for the entire season. It also tells me that maybe he's acting as the ambassador for other members of the team who might not feel comfortable approaching James Harden about his style of play. And it also tells me that he don't give a shit if he gets traded, because he knows that his money is already guaranteed.
But there was absolutely positively no carryover into the locker room, no situation where
allegedly
ultimately guys had to end up going their separate ways because it was so heated. People were devastated that they lost, but it was that simple. There was no truth to any friction that was carried over into the locker room. Now, to answer your question, Will, about what should the Rockets do from here, I think they should replace Mike D'Antoni. And I don't say it like Mike D'Antoni deserves to be fired. I don't say it like Mike D'Antoni can't coach. What I'm saying is Mike D'Antoni, in my estimation, Max, is a coach that you bring in to create excitement, reinvigorate or invigorate an offense, win you regular season games, and maybe a couple of rounds in the postseason.
Well, there are coaches like that. I've mentioned that in the past. Doug Collins, Mike D'Antoni, Rick Adelman. There are coaches of that ilk who can bring your team to a respectable level, maybe even a 50 to 55 win level, but they're not championship level coaches.
But when you are talking about championship, competing for a championship, I don't believe that Mike D'Antoni is that guy. I think that Mike D'Antoni, the system that he employs, it usually puts an insurmountable amount of weight or a tremendous level of weight on the shoulders of one individual, and you ride it into the ground to the point that as the postseason wanes and you're preparing for a best of 7 series, somehow, some way, that individual is not going to have what it takes to propel you over an elite team. So I think that Mike D'Antoni is a damn good coach. I think that he belongs being a coach in the NBA. But if I'm Tillman Fertitta, the owner for the Houston Rockets, who I've had the pleasure of getting to know and spoken to on several occasions, and this man does not play. He's the real deal. He's reminded me of how he came from nothing and how he started with one restaurant, and look at what the hell he's done. He's worth over $5 billion right now. This man is about winning. He believes in himself.
He reminds me a lot of George Steinbrenner. That dude, Fertitta, and he does not understand. When you decide to get on TV and be boisterous like that, that's going to detract from the Houston Rockets' ability to attract free agents. He might not grasp that right now, but that gung-ho, we're going to win at all costs, and I'm going to be the boss, and everybody's going to listen to me, and people are going to quake whenever I walk into a room, that shit don't fly anymore. This is not 1978. This is 2019. With dudes out here making $40, $45 million a year, they're not trying to act as if they're supposed to quake in fear over some owner who has a superiority complex because he's a self-made billionaire.
Oh, and I don't believe that Mike D'Antoni is the man that's going to get it done for him. I don't.
Okay, first, to your Mike D'Antoni point, I couldn't disagree more in this case. And once I thought...
Of course, because one of your plugs is Daryl Morey. And Daryl Morey, for right now, is still trying to hold on to Mike D'Antoni because Mike D'Antoni listens to him slavishly. And for those of you who don't know, it's very clear to me that when Max Kellerman talks about the quote-unquote very intelligent general manager in the NBA that he speaks to, he's talking about Daryl Morey. That's why Max Kellerman is so gung-ho for the analytics.
I thought as you do about D'Antoni. I thought he's a guy you brought in to inflate assets. They wrote about this in Moneyball. Michael Lewis did about Billy Beane. He would take a good, hard thrower who could throw strikes, make him a closer, rack up a bunch of saves, and then trade him for someone who was actually really good because people were enamored with the save stat. That happens with D'Antoni. You can bring him in, there's a faster pace, more points are scored, and all the players' stats make them look better than they really are. And I would think if I'm a GM, I'd use D'Antoni to inflate the assets and then trade them for players who I actually thought were really good. So I once thought that way about D'Antoni, and maybe it's still true to an extent. But I disagree when it comes to the Rockets. Stephen A., the reason the Rockets are able to compete the way they are with the Warriors, this year notwithstanding, although they took them 6 games, that didn't happen like with Portland, for example. The reason they're able to do that is precisely because of Mike D'Antoni's system.
So let me ask you a question, Max Kellerman. When the Houston Rockets made it to the Western Conference Finals back in 2015 and Kevin McHale was the coach, and they only had James Harden, they did not even have CP3. How were they competing with the Golden State Warriors back then? Now, we know the series ended up being a 5-game series, but at least they made it to the Western Conference Finals. My point being is this. This person here, Max Kellerman, is trying to give all of this unjust and undue credit to Mike D'Antoni because of Mike D'Antoni's basketball adherences, not based in results.
Isaiah Thomas, the Hall of Famer, laments and yells at me about if you score from all 5 areas, not just 3 points, the paint and the free throw line, but also mid-range and down on the block, it's harder to defend you. But you have to be so judicious in terms of how often you go to the block in the mid-range because the returns aren't good on those kind of investments. So because Mike D'Antoni invests so heavily on a Freudian slip, on the most important...
No, it was not a Freudian slip. It was an idiotic slip because there's nothing heavenly about Mike D'Antoni's brand of offense. He's already shown over the course of his time period as a head coach in the NBA over the past 15 years or so that he is exactly what Stephen A. Smith has explained him to be, a coach who might open your mind when it comes to certain offensive concepts, but he cannot take you to the quote-unquote promised land.
Areas of the court, the most efficient areas, the Rockets actually play over their heads and then have people like Stephen A. Smith here on First Take saying, well, in order to get over the top, they are over the top. The reason they get this far is because of D'Antoni's system. Now, how do they get over the hump and actually win a championship?
Once again, if that's the case, how did they get to the Western Conference Finals with Kevin McHale as the head coach back in 2015?
Stephen A., James Harden can't be looking for calls on threes to tie the game on the road in game 1.
Well, I have news for you. That's how he plays because he does not have the athleticism to beat double teams just based on his quickness and his speed. He does not have that type of ability. So he needs help from the refs, especially if he's just going to dribble and go 1-on-3 as the Mike D'Antoni system allows him to do.
And looking for the refs to bail him out. James Harden can't be dribbling the ball out of bounds and not hitting big shots.
Well, let me say this about you. Your point about inflating the assets is an incredibly astute point, and I give you a lot of credit for that. Because I do understand what you're saying with that, because D'Antoni and his system and what he's able to do for players, Daryl Morey is exactly the kind of GM skillful enough to take those inflated assets and make it into something. You're absolutely right about that. But I would say to you this, and by the way, I don't hold anything against D'Antoni for losing in the second round. I believe if it were not the Warriors, the Houston Rockets would have been to the conference finals.
Well, obviously. One would think that were it not for the Golden State Warriors, the Rockets would make it to the finals. That's what I would think, even though one might surmise that Portland may have given them a good run.
Against D'Antoni in these playoffs. So it's just that you ran into Golden State the round before. But I'm just saying to you, when I look at superior teams in the NBA, if you are a team, you're going to be the Mike D'Antoni team in the postseason.
And you know what's so funny? And I'll probably address this again in another video, especially when I'm speaking about Golden State. So many of the quote-unquote NBA pundits on ESPN and Fox Sports 1 have put forth or postulated what is, in my view, an inaccurate assertion that the reason why the Golden State Warriors lost the NBA Finals in 2016 is because they started to break down during the playoffs due to the fact that they strived so hard during the regular season. Well, they have not strived hard this season, and they're still breaking down. So the point being is this. You should go all out to the best of your ability while you're out there on the floor, and maybe the coach can limit the minutes. But just rearing back and not playing as hard as possible over the course of the season, that does not guarantee that you're going to be healthy when the playoffs come.
Hold on,
You're just going to do it.
I have to follow up with both of you then. Who is the inflated asset on the Rockets then? It's actually Harden.
It's Harden and CP3. Because if you were to put CP3 on another team as the lead point guard, he would not be anywhere near as effective as he is right now with the Houston Rockets. What their system allows is for him to sit back and to wait for Harden to decide to pass him the basketball. So he is in a very good place right now with the Rockets. There are not many other teams where he would fit in anywhere near as well. Maybe, just thinking off the top of my mind, maybe Toronto replacing a Kyle Lowry. Maybe in Philadelphia. I'm not quite sure if you're willing to move Ben Simmons to another spot on the floor. Maybe to the power forward position. Who knows? Just going off the top of my head. But either way, right now the Rockets, they're in a conundrum. Because they have pieces that are meant to win now. James Harden is about to turn 30 if he's not 30 already. CP3 is about to turn, I believe, 34 years old. So what do they do now? Who's going to be willing to take a $40+ million a year contract in an over-the-hill point guard in CP3, who does not even have many of the attributes that you would require in a modern-day combo guard of today? Many of these combo guards, you need them to be able to fill it up from 35 feet and in, a la Steph Curry, a la Dame Lillard, so on and so forth. CP3 cannot do that at this stage in his career. He does not have the legs.
Because Harden, it's not that he's not capable of doing great things even without D'Antoni, but the kind of numbers that put him in the category of Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant and like the greatest two guards ever, he's not as good as those guys.
Of course not, but he's been given the greenest light in the history of professional basketball. I'm not quite sure if I've seen any other players with a light that damn green. Maybe Kobe circa 2006, maybe AI circa 2001, but there have not been many players who have gotten that green a light.
Even offensively.
Well,
By the way, Steve Nash won back-to-back MVPs, and I love Steve Nash. He was not as good as the historical players who won back-to-back MVPs.
Yeah, but I'll tell you.
Of course not, but Steve Nash was a great player.
I'll tell you what hurts your argument. Clint Capella got a 5-year, $90 million contract, primarily because of what he was able to do in Mike D'Antoni's system, right? Mm-hmm. But when he went up against Golden State, for the first few games, he was somewhat limited and exposed.
That's due to Draymond Green and his defensive greatness. When you're a marginal offensive contributor like a Clint Capella, Draymond Green can take you out of an entire series. The Golden State Warriors could take you out just with their game plan.
Why? Because when you're preparing for a best of 7, that's an asset that you were able to neutralize. So what I'm saying to you is you look at James Harden. That wasn't a system issue per se with James Harden based on what you're talking about. That was James Harden. Whereas in the case of Clint Capella, he was either bloated and inflated, or he was compromised by the system when it really counted. Pick your poison. The name that I would come up with is Clint Capella.
Well, I understand what you mean about Harden. Harden is a great offensive player, even without D'Antoni. But
That's
I'll talk about this, Stephen A. When D'Antoni showed up, and they were already going to Harden a lot, right? But he averaged 36 points a game this year. If no D'Antoni, no 36 points a game for James Harden.
I actually believe that James Harden had his best season last year. The previous year, when he averaged about 30 a game, and they won 65 games in the regular season, because they moved the ball around more and they involved Chris Paul more. What happened is that James Harden became too infatuated with his stats this year after CP3 went down, and he was trying to win a second consecutive regular season MVP, and they carried a lot of those bad habits into the playoffs.
That's fair, but I can retort by saying this. D'Antoni's had Steve Nash, he's had Amari Stoudemire, he had Sean Marion, he's had Joe Johnson, he had Kobe Bryant and Dwight Howard. He had, he's in New York. Well, he left when Carmelo was gone. Well, Carmelo basically pushed him out because he didn't want Carmelo there. He wanted Danilo Gallinari and Wilson Chandler and those boys.
Hey, look, I'm on record as saying that the Knicks never should have made that trade in the first place for Carmelo. I never understood why they made that trade when it was already known that Carmelo was going to come to the Knicks after that season. It made no sense for them to make that trade, but that's James Dolan 101.
Boys, but then he goes from New York. You're in Phoenix, you're in New York, you're in LA. Now you're in Houston. How many times are we going to make explanations for a man that hasn't gotten it done. Mike D'Antoni, all is brilliant.
I'm not quite sure if people are making a lot of explanations for him. You have the analytics stat geeks like Max Kellerman who go out of their way to try to explain away some of the things that he does, because I think that Mike D'Antoni is representative of Daryl Morey, who has pretty much become the patron saint of analytics stat geeks, not just amongst the NBA front offices, but also in the media circles. They love that dude, Daryl Morey.
Brilliance. Has never coached in an NBA Finals. Right now, he's sitting there talking about he wants a 3-year extension.
There were some suspensions against the Spurs that kept them out of the finals, probably, and they probably, I think, won that you would have won the championship. But you're right. I've been plenty critical of D'Antoni, and
that was in what, 07, when the Suns got suspended for coming off the bench against the Spurs when Robert Horry he knocked down Steve Nash. Yeah, the Suns, they would have won the championship that year, assuming that they made it to the finals. I think they would have beaten LeBron, but then again, who knows? The Spurs were able to come up with a defensive game plan against LeBron that completely nullified him. I don't think that the Suns would have been able to stop LeBron. I think that they would have won in the finals, but I believe that LeBron probably would have put up some type of historic numbers, because we know that everything went through him, as it always has been, as it always does. Everything goes through LeBron. So I don't see the Phoenix Suns as being a team that would have stopped LeBron on defense, but I think they would have won that series.
And the fact that they got Bizdelic is key. Without a defensive coordinator, he can't do it. But Stephen A., the guys you just mentioned, the teams you just mentioned, when D'Antoni has a willing muse, a Steve Nash, a James Harden, it works. When he doesn't, a Kobe Bryant, a Carmelo Anthony, when they have a guy doesn't buy in, it's not going to work.
Rhetorical question, because...
Well, I'm happy you stated that Kobe did not buy in, because I've been trying to tell that to many of Kobe's fanboys all over YouTube. I've been saying that for a very long time. Kobe never bought into Mike D'Antoni. And what's interesting about that is that Kobe actually wanted D'Antoni to be the coach of the Lakers instead of Phil Jackson. People act as if Kobe actually wanted Phil Jackson, but that's a lie. Kobe wanted D'Antoni because he wanted to prove that he could win a championship without Phil. And of course, it failed.
Because we got to go. But the definition of work is different than mine. I'm saying to you, Mike D'Antoni deserves to be a coach in the NBA. But when you are trying to win a championship, he has provided no evidence that he can do that.
I'll say one statement real quick, Will, and then I'll give it up. I'm saying this. If you get off of D'Antoni, the Rockets will get worse. They're maxing out what they can do right now. The question...
Well, you say if the Rockets get rid of D'Antoni that they're going to automatically get worse. Is that because there's going to be a lessening in the caliber of the coach? Or is it going to be because they're just getting older as a squad? Like, if you get rid of D'Antoni and you also change over some of the components of the roster, I think, yes, the team is going to get worse, but they're a team in transition right now. Their top players are 30 and up, and they're not really built to engage in a ball-sharing offense. You don't really want to have P.J. Tucker being asked to back his man down or break his defender down off the dribble. You don't want that. So the team is built for the D'Antoni system. So, of course, if D'Antoni leaves, they're going to look worse.
The question remains, how would you fix the Rockets? Stephen A's answer is change the coach. Your answer so far is simply James Harden has to play better.
My answer is change the coach and also change the star players as well. Pretty much just start from ground zero, because this team is not going to win a championship. The Rockets are not going to get to the point where they can win a championship. I just don't see it. I don't see them being better than Toronto next year if Toronto re-signs Kawhi. I don't see them being better than Milwaukee if Milwaukee's able to keep their major pieces. I just don't see it. And then, of course, you still have Golden State out west. You have LA making a comeback. Portland might be better with a healthy Nurkic. You never know what's going to happen.
My offer, let me offer at least one thought experiment. It's interesting that you bring up Clint Capella as an inflated asset, Stephen A. What about a name like Kevin Love? What about something on the trade market?
That wouldn't be bad. Kevin Love would not be bad for the Houston Rockets because he can definitely spread the floor.
Kevin Love would fit really nicely in Houston. I think that's would a guy like Clint Capella be enough to bring back Kevin Love? I think I wouldn't trade Clint Capella, but go ahead, Steve.
Will, I don't disagree with that, Will. But what I'm saying is, in a best-of-7 series, you got to play on both ends of the floor, and you can't be predictable. You can't say this is what we got. Figure out a way to beat us. Mike D'Antoni is pretty predictable. It's successful, but up to a point. Anywhere he can coach most places in the NBA. If you're trying to win a title, there is no evidence he's your guy.
Yeah,
and that is what Fertitta is thinking about as he sits back and contemplates, should I give this man a 3-year extension that he's
Stephen A.
clearly
saying
looking
that,
for?
then
Well, Fertitta was smart enough to understand that Mike D'Antoni is not a coach that you want to give an extension to, especially when your best player is 30 years old and it's already been proven that the style is not effective in winning championships. You make Mike D'Antoni a lame duck coach and make him prove that he deserves another contract.
then he's not. You're not just pulling that out of thin air. I understand that, Stephen A. I'll say this too: when they signed CP3, the question was, could those two coexist in a backcourt? And the answer was yes. It worked.
And that shocked me. I say that all the time. I thought that they were going to be at one another's throats from 2017.
Like when the Knicks got Earl the Pearl with Clyde Frazier, there's only one basketball, but it worked. They won a championship, and it looked like these two maybe could do it the way they were working together. And then CP3 started declining. We can see clearly this is not CP3 in his prime anymore. And so James Harden either needs a better crime partner at this point in CP3's career, or, to Will's point, they need to bring in a third guy who can maybe become the second guy to
trade away that inflated asset you suggest to get that.
You may have to. I just don't know if that's Kevin Love. Okay. Well,
But anyway, that's basically it on that. We'll see how things go with the Houston Rockets after the season is over. I do not believe that this is going to be the end of the issues that James Harden and CP3 have with one another. So peace.